Hello, welcome to part two of how to write a good paper. I've decided to organize this part around questions that students commonly ask. I've graded thousands of papers. I've heard all the questions. These are a few of them, and they're not bad questions, and I don't want you to think that. I realize that we're in the process of learning how to write a paper. I think sometimes they come from misguided assumptions, and so I'd like to talk to you about those. And mostly, they give me an opportunity to say a few more things about what I think are the principles of writing a good paper. Not so much the specific mechanics, but the principles of writing a good paper. So let's dive in here. One thing that students often ask me is, can I express my opinion? Now, that's a fine question. I understand you're trying to sort this out and understand how to write a paper. But I do think it comes maybe from an assumption that's incorrect. Remember, in part one, we said that the paper is not a report. So don't imagine it as a list of facts that are free from your interpretation or your opinion. I personally think you cannot write a paper like that. And there's even something to it that's a little bit insulting and arrogant. And so let me explain that. It's a misconception, especially about history, that history is this list of facts. And there's no opinion when a historian writes history. So let's start like this. It's a little bit arrogant because people talk about the facts and the data, but do you realize that facts and data are infinite? Your mind is finite. Facts and data are infinite. You can never report all of the facts. What you will always do is choose the ones that you think are particularly important to you. Let me give an example. Let's say you wanted to write a history of World War I. And so, do you really think you could tell without making any choices, you really think you could report every single event that happened between 1914 and 1918? Really? Basically, an infinite number of things happened. Nobody could ever report every event. So what you would do is choose some things to report and some things not to report. And when you make that choice, that is your opinion. Because you're saying, I think this is important, but this isn't. In history, in writing history, people frequently disagree about what's important, and they will criticize you for the things you left out. And that happens all the time in history. And that is inevitable. And that's because facts are infinite, and we always choose the facts that we think are important. So please don't think that you could ever write a paper without your opinion. I need to say a little more about what that means. But I'll say this too. The fact report style paper is also problematic. If you think you're going to write like a Wikipedia page, a lot of times I know this information, and why should it be repeated over and over and over again? A lot of times I don't care. And that's hard to say because details are important in history. I do care on some level, but if you're writing the kind of paper that I talked about in part one, it's a paper of analysis. And I hate to say this, but in some way, all the details, I can look those up. And that's my third point about that, is I can easily find out these things for myself. I really don't need you to tell me things that I can Google and find out in 30 seconds or 3 seconds. So every scholarly paper always has your opinion. There's no such thing as a paper that just reports the facts without opinion, because when you choose the facts out of the infinite number of facts, you choose the ones that you think are important. Now, maybe it helps if we say a little bit about what this word opinion means. Sometimes I think we use opinion to mean something like, I like red wine or I like white wine, and nobody really cares. You don't have to justify that. That's your preferences. And Generally, that's your home and private life. But at work, and I say that not just school, but I think work, you're obligated, your opinion means something else. You're obligated to give reasons for your opinion. That's what this whole process is about. That's it that I described in part one, for example. All that reading and research that you did, while you did that, you came up with some reasons that were convincing to you, and now your job is to explain them to me or to the reader. So your opinion always means, in this context, it doesn't mean your preferences, doesn't mean your feelings. It always means your reasoned opinion, based on what you studied, not on other things, based on what you studied in this particular project. So that's what we mean. Your reasoned opinion, here's what I think, here's my hypothetical answer to a very difficult question, and here's 3 to 5, 6, 7 reasons why I came up with that answer. That's what we mean. And in the scholarly academic world, your opinion must be your reasoned opinion. In fact, this is just a personal guess, maybe. This is a little bit of speculation, perhaps, but after grading thousands of papers, sometimes those people that are most confident that they have the facts on hand are actually the people who know the least about them. There's certain things that float around in our public discourse that everybody just thinks it's true. They just know it's true. A lot of people talk about the fascists. That's how fascist systems work. That's how fascist systems brainwash people, or of course the Nazis. That is an important topic, by the way. But these are the kind of things that I get in papers, and a lot of times not even related to fascism, the rise of fascism in the 1920s and 30s. Might be a paper about the American Civil War, and then I'll get, things about the Nazis in there. And that's because those people think that everybody knows what happened. We all know the facts. So have you ever really studied the appeal of fascist movements in Europe in the 1920s and 1930s? Do you really know what the Nazis did and thought? Are you sure? Because those are subjects of historical discipline, of historical research, which means that you have to go to the archives to study those. And that also means that they are not settled by any means. And so what a lot of times people do is they think they're on safe ground because everybody knows it. And what they end up doing is spreading rumors and speculating. So be careful about that. And a lot of times those are the people that they get all kind of upset when you challenge them, because those are the facts. All educated people know that. And let me tell you something, that is precisely not the scientific endeavor. Everybody knows it's true. We all agree. That's not what we do in research, is question those assumptions. We test them, let's put it that way, instead of question. We test those assumptions. Anyway, I've said a lot about that. Let me move on to the next point. How do I use citations? So there's two parts here. One part is pretty clear, and I won't spend much time on it. It's direct quotations. So whenever you use someone else's words, exact words, you must put them in quotation marks. There they are. Those are someone else's words. And then you must cite them, a footnote or a parenthetical citation. So here's the citation. The footnote came out of the PowerPoint program for some reason, but there are various ways to do that. And so we're talking about direct quotations, exact words from someone else that you're going to use in your paper. They must go in quotes. There's two elements. They must go in quotes to show that they are not your words, and there must be some kind of citation. There are numerous systems for doing this, APA, MLA. I like Chicago Manual of Style. I don't like APA and MLA, but I'm not telling you don't use those. What I'm really telling you is I don't care. Different languages have different systems as well. It's relative. They all try to accomplish the same thing. So I don't care. Pick your style. I've written things in Chicago Manual of Style, and I've had editors tell me they want APA, and I grudgingly put it in APA because I want to get published. So it's not a big deal. It's not an absolute moral standard. Now, when I say I don't care, that's not an invitation to be sloppy. Pick one, use it, be consistent and professional. We talked about credibility in part one, and that's part of credibility. I do not think that you should judge a book by its cover. I don't think that people are stupid because they make a spelling error or a grammar error, but there are people out there that do. And so why hurt your credibility? Be professional and consistent. You can get a guide to using any of these methods. Pick the one that you think is best for you and use it and be professional. But I want to say something more generally about citing authorities, because it's really important to me. And you start to see how this starts to be, it's more than just writing a paper for me. There's a philosophy in all of this. And this is about citing authorities more generally. So maybe not just in quotes, but just using authorities and how to use authorities. So this is your paper. It's not a medley of what other people say. It's not a collection. It's not an anthology of what other people say. So stringing together a bunch of authorities back to back is not a good idea. That's just a report of what other people say. You could just give me a bibliography and I could go read those authors for myself. Why should I read them through you? So the point is not to cite a bunch of other authorities. When I was a little kid, I took piano lessons and I never learned to play the piano. I quit, which is too bad. I wish I played the piano, but I don't. So one thing I did once, though, is I took all my music and I took one song and I pasted on the next song from another composer, and then I pasted on another song from another composer. I didn't modify it in any way. And I told my mom, I wrote a song, listen, and I played the song. And of course, she said, no, that's not your song. That's just 5 other songs pasted together. And that's exactly what I needed to hear. And so your paper is your paper. Don't paste together a bunch of authorities. But there's even something more important to me here. It's the way people use authorities. People use authorities. They make a controversial statement. One that I don't like very much, that people say, well, I don't know if I like it or not. But you hear this, democracies do not go to war against each other. I don't know if that's true or not. I have a lot of problems with the statement that I won't get into here. I don't know exactly what it means even. But so here's my point, though. Some people will write something like that, and to me, it's kind of controversial, and they'll put a footnote after it. And the footnote is supposed to mean true because some important person said it. I don't care. I really don't care. I would like to have a discussion about that statement that person just made. And just because you cite somebody doesn't mean I'm going to accept it as valid. This is an ancient principle in Western civilization. Citing an authority does not validate a claim. It's a logical fallacy. It's an appeal to authority. It's not an easy way out to win an argument. Citing an authority does not validate a claim. This is a logical fallacy. I feel this is a real problem in our society today. A lot of people, really intelligent people, seem to continually make this argument. There's a study. It's true. You get in an argument with a friend on social media and they send you a link to a study, which I'm not against that, but it depends on how you do it. I'm probably interested to read it, but that doesn't make their claim true. It just means somebody else, probably somebody pretty smart, thinks it too. But You ever get in a discussion with somebody, you're in a heated discussion, and the other person might be having some trouble holding up their argument, and suddenly they say, have you ever read this book? And you haven't read it. And that's okay. Like, it's good to talk about books that you've read, but the reason you can feel like sometimes the reason they do that is what they're doing is trying to validate a claim based on authority because they read a book that you didn't. And so the implication is, if you just read this book, you'd think like me. That's an illogical appeal to authority. So I'll just give you a little hint. The way to deal with that is to tell the person in return, okay, tell me what the book says. What's the argument in the book that's so great? And I often do that because I'm very busy and I read a lot of books and I have a long book reading list. And by the way, I might read it. I might really be interested, but just, give me a summary. Tell me what it's about, what its main thesis and the arguments are, and that's enough. And then we can get back to our discussion. Now, it is interesting what the experts say, and if you're a scholar, you do need to be aware of the discussion in your field. I'm not against experts, I'm not against specialists, but they don't validate a claim. In fact, I think as you become an expert, I'm an expert in my field, I think as you become an expert in your field, what you realize is highly intelligent people really strongly disagree. So it's interesting what the experts say, and the deeper you get into your field or your research, the more you should be aware of that. But here's what I would say about that. And by the way, I have this worry about our society today that seems to be a big part of the public discourse, this idea that because some expert somewhere said it, it must be true, and it's unquestionable truth. Like, if you want that kind of epistemological certainty, go to church or get in a time capsule and go back to the Middle Ages. So I think it's kind of a problem today in the public discourse. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against experts. I started to say this, and let me finish. I'm not against experts, I'm not against authorities. But here's the thing, and a lot of those people have worked hard to attain that authority. I don't know that all of them necessarily live up to their credentials, or I don't want to say deserve them, but that's kind of what I mean. But a lot of them do. A lot of these people have, they've studied an area carefully for a long time, and they do have something important to say about it, and you should not ignore them. But here's what I want to say. When a real expert says something, that person has reasons why they say it. You need to know those reasons. That's what's important to you, and you need to be able to describe them to me. You have to know those reasons and understand them so that you too can participate in the scholarly discussion. That's why often when people cite sources, authorities, I'll say, let's say you cite me, I'll say, well, why does Brandon think that? Like, you cite me an article of mine, it says Brandon, page 53, and you think that settles it. And I'm going to say, no, like, explain to me why Brandon thinks that. So, citing authorities probably most of the time have really good reasons for what they say. But it's not the decorations that they wear on their lapel that makes those things valid or credible. It's the reasons why they hold those ideas and why they've come to those conclusions, and you need to know the reasons. Now, the next point I think I can dispense with quickly. It's related to the point I just made. How many sources should I have? So last time we talked about primary sources and secondary sources. And so I never say you must have 15 sources in your bibliography. In fact, most of the time that kind of puts me off, because usually anybody can go on the internet and find some important books and cite them. It's kind of insincere to have a long list of books that you never read and don't care about, and then cite in the incorrect way that I just discussed. So I never say, honestly, in the field of history, if you're working with a primary source, you could write a whole book on one. You'll probably build up other sources along the way, but you could really have, as an undergraduate, you could write a very nice essay, I think, just on about one primary source. Secondary sources, you kind of need to know pro and against, like you kind of need to balance them, but you could write a nice paper based on two secondary sources, comparing and contrasting their views. And I would have no problem with that. I've found myself as a scholar that sometimes I get so much more out of one book. And then, of course, the problem is that it's only one. You need other views. But I get so much. I have some books that I've read several times, and you can see they're covered in my notes, because I get, and I might disagree with them a lot, but it doesn't matter. That was my entrance into the problem, and I know that book really well, and I know the ideas behind it. I can criticize those ideas, but that's so much more valuable to me than a long list of books that I superficially glanced at because I learned somewhere on the internet that they're the important figures in the field, and I need to cite them to be cool. Well, then there's this question, can I paraphrase? So I want to talk about that a little bit too. People ask me this, can I paraphrase? And I put that in quotes. I'm not sure what people mean by that. Again, it's a word that we better think about what it means. I think when people ask that, this is what they have in mind. They're probably afraid of plagiarism, but this is what they would like to do. There's a paragraph in an article, and they would like to rewrite that in their own words and put it in their paper and not plagiarize. So all I would say to that is, why? That's more of you telling me what someone else said. Just give me the bibliographical reference. I'll go look it up and read it myself. Why should you repeat in your words what somebody else said? Now, if by paraphrase you mean, this is how I think of paraphrase, I do it all the time. So that kind of goes back to citing authorities. I read a book. This is the author. This is the author's thesis. Here's 3 important reasons why that author comes to this hypothesis. Maybe a quick criticism or an explanation of how that book fits into your paper. That's really crucial too. That can be done in a paragraph. A 350-page book. Tell me what it's about in a paragraph. That's a paraphrase. You read it, you understand it, you're going to explain it to me. And I think most importantly, how does it fit into your paper? All right, so, and again, I think it comes from a misunderstanding of how to write a paper. It's not pasting together a bunch of authorities and just repeating a bunch of things without your opinion, as people think they're doing. And so I think it comes from a misconception. And then, of course, how do I avoid plagiarism? Some people are really fearful of that. So I don't think I have to say too much about this. Here's the main way to avoid plagiarism. Listen to the 2-part lecture that I just gave and do what I'm telling you. Ask a good question about a serious problem. Study a certain limited amount of data. Based on your study, try to come up with a hypothetical answer, and then explain to me in the paper how you came up with that answer. Probably you're not going to plagiarize. The kind of plagiarism that I'm worried about, I don't want to. Plagiarism is a complicated topic. There are cases. I don't want to get into all the details here, but generally at our level, it's pretty clear cut. Like, people don't just accidentally plagiarize. right? That's generally not, that doesn't happen at our level. So I don't want to be threatening. I I keep saying this and I want to repeat it. I look at this as we take small steps and you're learning a process, and I want to teach you how to do it right. And I'm pretty gentle. If you follow the principles that I'm laying out here and you do your best, I'm not petty. I'll be nice to you. I'm not saying I'll give you an A, but I'll respect you. Just say what you have to say and see what happens. So I'm not trying to scare you. On the other hand, if I am a researcher, so I'm pretty good at catching plagiarism. It's when I catch plagiarism, I mean, we have today programs that help us catch it, but I don't need those. I could identify plagiarism long before they had programs to catch it, and I can do it without them. And I don't rely on it, by the way. But enough about that. I can catch it, and it's not when I do. Let's put it this way: nobody in my 20 years of teaching, nobody has ever proven that they accidentally plagiarized ever. It doesn't happen. So just don't mess with that. I'm here to help you and to guide you, not to scare you. And if you are sincere with me, I'll be sincere and decent with you in your papers. I know people struggle with English as a second language. This is not an English grammar class. It's a history class. Every single little grammar mistake, it's not like I'm keeping a tally. I'm really interested in reading what you have to say. And so anyway, this is getting long. I better get to the last point. A really great question. How long should the paper be? And I take this in a really philosophical way. I know that might surprise you. You might think that's strange, and I understand why you want some guidance, and I've given it to you. Most of my classes, I say 3 to 6 pages. So, and in fact, a lot of students, and probably professors too, think that a good paper should be really long. I'm more afraid of the long papers than I am of the short papers. I usually like to assign short papers. Now, before I talk about the problem of long papers, let me say something about short papers. It can be too short. Remember, we asked a question that's difficult to answer, a question that there never will be a final solution. And so it's a pretty weighty question. It's probably not solved in a paragraph. It can be too short. You can treat a difficult question superficially, and that's not good enough. But like I said, the thing that bothers me even more are the long papers, because sometimes students think that if they write a lot, that I'll be impressed by that. I think, unfortunately, sometimes professors actually are that way. They think that a long paper, for some reason, is a better paper. And they have page requirements. I never would say, right, you must write a 15 to 20 page paper. I don't do that. And I have reasons for that. I've thought it through carefully, because when I do that, then I know this is going to sound strange, but let me explain. What I'm doing is devaluing the words on the paper. That's how I feel about it. I'm just going to be really personal with you. And so what I get is maybe 3 meaningful pages. If I say 15-page paper, I get maybe 3 meaningful pages and 12 pages of you meeting the requirements. And those pages are worth nothing. They're worthless. So I don't want to do that. I want words to mean something. And I want you to, how long should the paper be? So I give you some guidelines. But the paper should be as long as it takes to say what you have to say about the problem. And some problems are bigger than other problems. Some things are more easily resolved than others. So the paper is however long, however many pages, however many words it takes you to say what you have to say. And that might be rather brief. It's okay. I look at all of this as a process, and we're at the beginning steps. Most of you. I do want to say this, because I don't want to insult you. Some students are more advanced, and occasionally somebody comes into my class and they already have a topic that they're really interested in. Maybe they've worked on it in a different class, and so they're already pretty developed, and so they might write a longer paper. And if you write a 20-page paper and I'm on the edge of my seat while I'm reading it, because all those words are meaningful and you really have something to say, you're probably going to get an A. But like I said, if it's just, I say you have to write a 15-page paper and there's 5 good pages and 10 pages of you filling space, just cut off the 10 pages of you filling space. I'm not interested. And so making this last point is difficult. I'm sure some people won't go here with me, but I'm really against the idea of making education into a bureaucratic exercise, or let's say a ritualistic exercise, where you put certain books in the bibliography and say certain words and write a certain number of them and hand it into me on time, and I give you an A. Because as I said before, what that does in my view is it kind of makes the words meaningless. Now, I don't think society has progressed to this point where it's so bad, but the logical extension of that, where could you go with that? It could develop to the point where you could put anything on the paper and it doesn't really matter. And a lot of people would do that. I fear a lot of professors and students would be all right with that because it's easy. You don't really have to think about any hard problems. Makes your life easy. You get the degree and the better job in the end. And you never really have to think about anything seriously. And I think that there's a lot of people in the world who like that. And then there's another element, and this is where things get deadly serious for me, because I do think there's a group of people, not most of us. Most people just kind of want to get on and get by with their life. But there's a group of people who will see that situation and they'll see, it's not about what the person says. It's about the fact that I can make them say it. Most people aren't like that. Most professors aren't like that. But there is a certain element of society that is. Look around you. And there are people that will say that they would enjoy the fact that you don't really care what you write. So if you don't care, that creates a vacuum. And there's certain authoritarian types of people who will step in and see that vacuum and they'll seize it. And they'll say, that's my place because I can make you say something because you don't care, do you? I really like Václav Havel. He was the first president of Czechoslovakia. And he wrote this great essay in the 1970s, The Power of the Powerless. And he describes a society where words really don't matter. And it's about power and the ability to force you to say things. And he talks about this, makes up this story about the greengrocers living in communist Czechoslovakia. And the greengrocer sells vegetables, right? But he has to put up this stupid little sign. It's a communist slogan. It's a ritual. That's what Havel calls it. And it says, "Workers of the world unite." The greengrocer never thinks about that. He doesn't care about it. He probably thinks it's stupid. Everybody around thinks it's stupid. It's absolutely meaningless. The words don't mean anything to anybody, but they do in a way. It's not what the words say. It's the fact that he submits and he does it. It's the fact that he doesn't. If he doesn't do it, then people will complain. He'll have to go before a committee. He'll lose his job. And so it's about the fact that he can be forced to say things that mean nothing. And that's what can happen if we are irresponsible. If you are willing to say things, say meaningless things to get ahead, Like, that might work for a while. I sort of think our Western civilization is a place where we're kind of just getting by. A lot of people will just, and it's fairly harmless because the predators haven't quite emerged yet, although I think they're coming. It's okay. I just said that because I'll keep my job that way and I won't get in trouble. And a lot of people are like that, and they're not bad people. And I think this is what Havel is saying. But when we all do that, when we all submit, and when we get in the practice of saying empty things, sooner or later, some person with bad intentions is going to see the situation, because I think that's how human nature is, and they're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to look out. It might be a professor, and they're going to look out and say, oh, look, a bunch of people who are willing to just say anything to be left alone. I can manipulate that situation and make them say what I want. So that's how did we get there? Well, the principles of writing a good paper are very important to me, and I'm trying to point that out in part 1 and also in part 2. So how long should the paper be? The paper should be as long as it takes you to say what you have to say. Go on a little adventure. Say what you think. Don't try to fill space with empty words, because it's a waste of time and it's also highly insincere. And I would argue collectively, if we all do it, dangerous for a free society. Don't do it. Say what you have to say and then stop. I'll respect you for that. And speaking of stopping, I think it's time for me to stop. Thank you for your attention.